Happy Freaky Friday, everybody. I am Jeremy Birmingham. This is the Austin and Birm Show on 97.1 The Fan, 10 TV and 10 TV Plus in Columbus. We are here once again to round out one more week in the summer. Austin is still on vacation down there in Tennessee with his wife and child. I am manning the fort talking about recruiting mostly this week because it's a pretty busy week for recruiting. And when I'm solo, that's what I default to. So today is going to be a Freaky Friday episode. It's not going to be that freaky, if we're going to be honest. I'm going to talk some recruiting stuff. Ohio State has a number of its targets in the class of 2026 getting ready to make a decision, including a pair of them on Friday, one more on Saturday, and a couple others that have set decision dates and may be announcing soon. Others that haven't made a decision date public and may be announcing soon as well. So a lot of things to talk about. But first, before we get into the nuts and bolts of other people making decisions, I think it's important to go back in time about 1 month from now. And that was the May 30th official visit weekend that saw Ohio State hosting a little-known defensive lineman out of California named Khary Wilder. Khary committed to Ohio State shortly after his official visit. It was a trip that obviously made a pretty big impact on him and his family. And it's worth noting that Ohio State had only offered him a scholarship 2 weeks before that. So he's a player that not a lot of people have spoken about or spoken to, but Khary has allowed us some time to chat with him after a big week for him in Indianapolis, where he was named the defensive MVP of the Rivals 5-Star Challenge. And we're starting to see his national profile, his recruiting star on the rise. So I wanted to bug him, basically, and give Ohio State fans, Buckeyes fans, and everybody around the country a little bit of a chance to get to know Khary better. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to talk to Khary Wilder, then we're going to come back and we'll talk about the weekend's decisions and everything else. So enough of my prattling on. Here's Khary Wilder and myself, Jeremy Birmingham, on the Austin and Birm Show. Khary Wilder joins us now on the Austin and Birm Show. This is The Beat on 97.1 The Fan, 10 TV Plus in Columbus. Congratulations, Khary, on the last month. You have done a remarkable job, young man, of avoiding the spotlight since you committed to the most, biggest brand name in college football. How have you managed to pull that off?
Well, I've been, only talking to, certain people, of course, not trying to just talk to everybody about, my commitment and my recruitment in general, talked it over with my family a lot, try to keep the relationship with my coaches and everything. So, just like that, really.
If we can, I mean, your recruitment is one that I think is very interesting, especially in today's world where everything is online. Everyone's talking online nonstop. There's all this attention. Ohio State, Matt Patricia, Larry Johnson, et cetera, they started reaching out to you in the spring as they came out to see you in mid-May at your high school and offered you a scholarship. 2 weeks later, you made an official visit to Ohio State. A week later, you were committed. Is that how you felt this was going to go? Was that your plan when all of your recruitment really started to pick up? Or what was it about the relationship and the connection you had with the Ohio State coaches that made you say, hey, I don't need anything else?
So initially, it wasn't always my plan to, only take really 1-2 visits. I wanted to, at first, I really wanted to take all 4 of my visits and, see all the schools and everything. But I will say leading into that, Ohio State was the only school that I hadn't actually visited. I visited Washington, I visited UCLA, I visited Notre Dame. So I was already able to get a grasp of those programs, and, see the cities and everything and see everything they had to offer. So when I first made it out to Ohio State, it was great, being able to see the city for the first time and really experiencing the culture. And, I kind of really fell in love with it, really. My parents loved it, too. My mom, she really loved the city of Columbus. She sees that as a place where, even she can stay. So we all just kind of fell in love with the campus, the culture. We had a great time. And I felt like the relationship I had built with Coach Johnson in just a short time, it was there. So I was, it led me to make that decision.
A lot of Ohio State fans, a lot of people in general look at Larry Johnson and they see that he's older than a lot of defensive line coaches around the country. And they think maybe he's not able to connect with the younger generation in a way that a lot of other coaches seem to because of social media and graphics and Snapchat or TikTok or all the other stuff. What was it about him that you personally found to be the right fit for you?
Well, really just the NFL production, all the NFL players he's produced, seeing the guys he has and how he got them to the next level. He showed me a development plan that he has for me to get there, and really that's all I can ask for. Like social media, all that stuff aside, at the end of the day, the end goal is to make it to the NFL, be the best player I can be. And I feel like he can really maximize my development and, get me to that level.
I'm probably going to jump around from thought to thought here, Kari, because it's what I do. But when it comes to Larry Johnson, I don't think a lot of people get a true sense of what he's about until you spend time with him on campus, until you're in his position room inside of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, until you see the way his current players are with him. How important was that for you and your family on campus to see the way that the current group of Ohio State defensive linemen, the Rushmen, are with Larry Johnson and how he is with them?
It was definitely great to see that on my official visit. Edric Houston, he was my host, so it was great to spend time with him. I talked to him a lot about Coach Johnson and how he's developing and everything like that. And he really like made it clear to me that at Ohio State, Larry Johnson, he acts like he's really like a support figure for them. Like anything they need, they can always come to him, and like he's all about his players and the people in his room and developing them. And like I said, that's really all I can ask for in a program and a coach.
Me and Edric have a little bit of a back and forth going over the last couple of years. He likes to pick on me. I like to pick on him. Can you say something nice about Edric Houston so that I can clip this and send it to him and tell him that I'm speaking nice about him?
Uh, he's definitely a great person. He was a great host. Took me out to see the city, and I really got to see what Columbus was like and what it was. And I had a great visit. He definitely made my visit a fun experience.
Edric is a wild dude, man. He is absolutely, and I say this without any reservation, without question, my favorite player, maybe that I've ever covered at Ohio State. He's just an absolute great kid. I think it's interesting you brought up the city of Columbus, Kari, and the impact that it had on you and your parents. And
Mm.
I've had a lot of conversations over the last 15 years or so that I've been covering this program about kids and their families being surprised when they get to Columbus for the first time and saying, "This is not what I expected." Uh,
Yeah.
what is that? Why do you think that it has the reputation it does until you get there? And what was the thing about the city that really shocked you guys the most?
That's funny because what you just said, that's the same thing my mom and dad said, like that they were shocked at the city and everything. Because, being from Los Angeles, you don't really know, especially me, I didn't know a lot about Ohio, what it really looked like, anything about it. But, being out there, seeing that, it's a college city, but at the same time, like it's still a pretty populated city. Like it has downtown area, everything like that. So it was good to see that it wasn't, just I didn't really have an idea of what it was like before, but it definitely surprised me, just the
I
city in
think
general.
anecdotally, and I say this to a lot of folks, and so I'm not anybody who's ever talked to me about it before will know I'm not just saying it to try to be clever, but I think a lot of people who aren't from the Midwest and who haven't spent time in Ohio, especially kids like yourself from out west in a major city like LA, think Ohio and Iowa are like the same place, and they're just because there's four letters and a bunch of vowels, and it is certainly different. Not It's not a knock on Iowa; it's a beautiful place if you like cornfields. When you are making this decision, Kari, like you got home from your official visit, you sat down with your family, you took one more official visit after that. How did you know Ohio State was it? Like, what was there something that you didn't feel on the next trip, or what was the ultimate like thing that puts it over the top when you're like, hey, I don't need to really think about this anymore?
Well, like immediately after my visit, I knew they were my number one, and I knew like that's like before I took any of my other visits, I told you that I had went to all the other schools, so I
Yeah.
saw the other schools and everything. I saw the other programs, but after visiting Ohio State, I was like, yeah, this is definitely my number one and everything like that. So I was ready, kind of. I don't want to say I was ready for the whole process to be over, but I knew where I wanted to be at that point, so I kind of just pulled the trigger on it.
Kari is we've got you listed on all of the national recruiting profiles at 6'4", 250, 260 pounds. Got 28 scholarship offers. You're listed as the number 27 ranked edge player in the 247 Sports Composite, the number 23 ranked defensive lineman in the On3 consensus. This week, you went to Indianapolis and were the defensive MVP, dominated people there. Do you feel like people are not paying enough attention to you as a football prospect?
Yes, sir. I felt this way, for a long time. Even going back to my sophomore year, I led the state in sacks in my class, and ever since then, I just feel like I've been very underrated. So that was my goal this offseason. I only went to 2 camps. Each camp I went to, I won the MVP, and I try not to, get too fixated on, rankings and everything like that. But I definitely feel like, I'm super underrated. And, every time I go out to a camp, whether that be to training, to a game, anything where there's, people watching, I want to, show that I'm the best player on the field every single time I'm out there. So, that was just the goal. And, that continues to be the goal going into the season.
Why do you think that that's the case? And I'm going to posit, if I may, the website, the national recruiting website that has you ranked the highest is rivals.com.
Sure.
They have you as the number 8 ranked defensive lineman or defensive end, number 100 overall player in the country. And I think it's because Adam Gorney, who is the national recruiting director for Rivals, is in California. So he's the one that's got to see you, because I don't think when you're dealing with On3 where Steve Wiltfong or Chad Simmons are in the South or the Midwest, that they've had a chance to really put eyes on you.
Mm-hmm.
What was their reaction, those national guys, when they got to see you this week for the first time? And what did they tell you about what to expect as far as those rankings? Because as you said, they don't matter that much. Like, you're committed to Ohio State, you're committed to the national champs, you're committed to the most historic program in college football history. But what are those guys saying about what to expect now when it comes to the ranking, the buzz around the country, the profile, et cetera?
I talked to Chad Simmons a good amount. He made a post about me, and he was just kind of saying like that I balled out that day, I balled out at the camp and everything like that. So I haven't heard too much about him about rankings, but I definitely will say that my main point in going out to the camp was really trying to dominate and show that I'm one of the best defensive linemen in the country, and that I'm one of the best defensive ends in the country, one of the most versatile. So I feel like after my camp and everything, after what I've shown, that, to an extent that can't really be denied. And, I'm going to keep proving that I'm one of the best defensive linemen in the country, because at the end of the day, that's where I feel like I am. And, that's just what I want to prove to myself and prove to everybody else as well.
The word you just mentioned there was versatile. And that is from talking to different sources that I deal with inside of the Ohio State program. When they really identified you and said, hey, this is a guy we have to have. That versatility is one of the things that I heard about. I was told, again, anecdotally, that when the Buckeyes were out there to watch you practice at Junipero Serra High School in Gardena, that you were playing some tight end, and that you basically lost somebody on a seam route 30 yards down the field, and that it opened the eyes of some people at Ohio State that were like, wow, this is not what we thought.
Okay.
You're listed as a defensive lineman on On3 Sports. You're listed as a defensive end at Rivals. You're listed, like, Ohio State, from what I've understood, thinks you can play on the edge. They think you can play as a 3-tech. Where do you want to be? Where do you think your value is? And how do you get better from here when all these things are now starting to come to a head?
I think I'm most valuable, being versatile, really. That's what I've done at the high school level. That's what I've done at camps. I'm just trying to show that I'm trying to show that I'm versatile enough to play at that defensive end spot, to play at that defensive tackle spot. I feel like I can pass rush from anywhere, whether that's in a 0, a 1, a 3, a 5, a 7, anywhere, really. I feel like I can just go and pass rush. I know the main part of their plan was for run downs to, hold the edge down, and then pass rush situations, I could go inside, I could line up over the center, or I could stay at the edge and, really go rush from anywhere. And I think that's my strongest point. And, from this point on, I feel like, that I'm just trying to get my body right for the college level and everything. Because as soon as I come in, I want to be able to compete. I want to be able to try to make an impact on the program my first year there. So with that goal in mind, I've been getting my body ready, trying to get bendier, trying to get, just every part of my game better so I can, come at the college level and try to make a difference immediately.
Do you play the NCAA football game on PS5 or Xbox?
Yes, sir. I played on PS5.
So, the recruiting pitches, right? Like that you have to make when you're the coach. Those are old, even back, 15, 20 years ago when the game was out, when I was younger. One of the things that was always a part of the recruiting pitch is playing time, right?
Yeah.
It's weird because I think most rational high school seniors understand that there is a significant jump between high school football and Ohio State, right?
Yes, sir.
But you're looking at an Ohio State roster, especially at defensive end, that looks like it's pretty wide open for guys like you to come in next year and have a shot to make an impact.
Yes, sir.
Did that matter? Does that matter in this process anymore? Because I think so much has changed in the world of high school recruiting and college football in the last 5 years and over the last decade plus that I wonder if some of the old things still matter. Like, is that a consideration? When I was your age, kids were like, hey, I'm not going to go to this school if I can't wear my number. You know what I mean? Like it's different now because there's so many other things you have to consider. But how much does depth chart and opportunity like that matter to a kid with your aspirations?
That definitely matters so much to me, and that's another reason why I was able to, to just pull the trigger and make my decision early because, looking at that depth chart and, being in meetings with Coach Patricia and Coach Johnson, they made it clear to me that as soon as I come in, I will have the opportunity to show what I'm about, to show how I can play and, to come in and try to make a difference my first year. And really that's all I can ask for. I want to go to the NFL. I want to be developed to go to the NFL. And also I want to get the, playing experience as soon as I can and just, have the opportunity to show that I can play. And, of course, with recruiting, you don't want to just be another person. You don't want to just be another player. And they made me feel like I was a priority and like I can come in and really make a difference in the program. And, that meant a lot to me.
Another one of those recruiting pitches in the video game is Pipeline State, right? Ohio State is not next door to California, but in the last handful of years, CJ Stroud, Chris Olave, you started to see a handful of guys from California make their way to Ohio and not just contribute, but become superstars. Did you ever think about going to Ohio State to play football when you were younger, or is that something that only became a reality to consider like, hey, I could go that far away if I wanted? Is that new, or is that something that you thought about growing up?
Growing up, I knew playing Division I football was always the goal. It was always a dream. I will say I did grow up watching a lot of Chase Young highlights, watching a lot of the Bosa brothers and everything like that. So I was always, high on Ohio State defensive linemen. They were always, players that I watched and everything like that. But I had no clue that, whether I was gonna try to stay close to home or whether I was gonna go as far away as Ohio. I just knew that, I wanted to be in the best fit for me and, wherever that felt like. And that's definitely Ohio State for me.
Has Coach Jay been able to get you on the phone with those dudes? Has he been able to get you in a conversation with any of those former rushmen?
Not as of yet, no.
Is there, would Chase Young be the guy that like you'd want to hear from the most, or is there a different one that you're like,
yeah, I would say Chase Young. I grew up watching a lot of his Ohio State tape.
Chase Young in 2019 may have been the best defensive lineman in a single season in the history of college football. But that's probably a topic for a different podcast. Talk about the relationship, if you can, that you have with Ryan Day. I know it's weird because, again, your recruitment did not last long when it came to Ohio State, and you may not have had an opportunity to really connect with Coach Day and him or his family prior to your official visit. But what did that trip to Columbus show you and your parents about him, and how comfortable were they saying this is the guy that's going to, turn my boy into a man?
I feel like in that official visit, in just that short amount of time, we were able, to build a relationship with Coach Day. Our first day, I want to say, we had dinner. Him and his wife, they came and sat at our table. They talked to my mom, my parents, just for a long time, just sitting down while we were eating and everything. My little brother and little sister were there. They were, very nice to them and everything like that. And then with the meetings, he just made it clear that I was a priority to me and my parents. And, my parents just love to hear that, for such a prestigious school and for everything. And, being the national champions and everything like that I was such a priority to them and I was such a big piece in their recruiting class. They just, love to hear everything about that. So I feel like my parents definitely have a good sense of who Coach Day is, and they loved it so much so that we were able to make this decision early.
Are you planning to enroll in January? Is early enrollment on the table for you?
Yes, sir.
Seems like
I'll
it's
be
becoming
enrolling in January.
super important to do that nowadays for kids. Now I'm just gonna fire off some rapid questions here. I've seen photos of you
Okay.
on your Ohio State official visit. You were wearing number 1 at high school. I think you wear number 33. I've seen you wearing number 9. What number do you want to wear and why?
I either want to keep 33 or wear number 8. I feel like I was gonna wear 8 my sophomore year, but our school, they only have medium jerseys at single digits, so I wasn't able to fit it. But yeah, definitely 33 or number 8. I like 33 because I feel like I built a reputation in it at Sarah High School, and just continuing that. And I've always liked number 8 because Kobe Bryant is my favorite athlete.
What is the meal or restaurant or place you go to eat or hang out with friends that when you are living in Columbus 5 months from now you're going to miss the most about LA?
Um, to be honest, I say me and my friends, we go to In and Out a lot, so that would probably be like the main thing. But besides that, that's really like the only place that's like, strictly in LA or strictly like out here that we go to a lot.
Unless you're going to like Roscoe's or something like that, which is a little different, a little chicken and waffles.
Oh yeah, yeah, Roscoe's too. I like Roscoe's. We just had that the other day.
When it comes to your future, if football didn't exist, what would you want to be doing with your life? Where do you see
Mhm.
what do you want to study? What's the goal for life away from the game?
The goal from life away from the game is, being in business. My mom, she's in the real estate. My dad and my grandma, they own properties as well. So, just seeing that, I've always been around real estate and, seeing what that can do and how you kind of can let your money like make itself really. And, that's definitely something I want to get into as soon as possible. I feel like even in college, I'm going to start getting into real estate and the business side of things. I feel like I would like, I just love business. I've always wanted to major in that really.
I think it is completely uncouth to ask about NIL in these situations. I don't doesn't matter, but I will tell you that Travion Henderson, who obviously you're familiar with, the running
Mhm.
back at Ohio State the last 4 years, he got very involved in real estate at Ohio State because of the NIL opportunities. And it's interesting that you guys have this opportunity now because 5 years ago, kids in your position would have never been able to say, I'm going to do this while I'm in college playing football. So it's a really cool uh, side piece of this new era of the game. Last thing, and I'll get you out of here, Kari. How do you get better, and how do you make sure that your seniors? What qualifies as a success for you in your senior year before you head off to Columbus?
I feel like the number one thing is winning, really. I want to, I my 3 years there, we've come close, but we haven't won anything significant. So I would say the number one thing is, winning. Really, my team, we have a younger team, so being a leader, being a captain, really just trying to get those younger guys on board, developing them, and to being the best players they can be. And for myself personally, just being dominant, really. The high school level, I played 3 years. For the last 2 years I felt I've been pretty very dominant on the high school thing. So just being dominant, finishing out my year, and then just getting ready for college, really. That's all it is. My body, my bend, everything like that, just every part of my game, just getting better. So when I do enroll in January, I can be the best athlete that I can be to go and compete.
Do you and your family have your next trip to Columbus planned? Is there a game you have circled? I know that the August 30th game against Texas is obviously a huge one, but as a noon start,
Yeah, definitely
coming
that
from
one.
California, that may not be easy for you.
Yeah, we've been talking about, being able to come out to games because, my games out here are on Friday night, but I for
Yeah.
sure want to be able to make it to that Texas versus Ohio State game. So definitely we're gonna find a way to make that work so I can come out there to see it.
There are red eye flights for a reason. A lot of LAX midnight flights to the Midwest. So I'm sure you will find a way. I appreciate you taking your time. I know you've got to get yourself ready to go to practice today. So thank you very much, Khary, for giving us a chance to get to know you a little bit. Look forward to seeing how things unfold for you as you get ready to translate into your senior season. So congratulations on the success. And I'm glad that the rest of the country is waking up to what Ohio State's coaches have seen already. So congrats again.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
No problem. That is Khary Wilder. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. I'll be right back after this break. And with that, Ohio State fans, you can see why the Buckeyes are so high on Khary Wilder. The Ohio State staff really circled him and identified him as a must-get in the late spring and wasted no time in accomplishing that. So now you know why. Let's talk, if we can, about what is coming this weekend for Ohio State. 3 decisions, 2 of them on Friday night, 1 on Saturday. Those are the ones that we know for sure. There are obviously other players around the country that may pull the trigger at any time. That would include Cleveland Glenville defensive tackle Jameer Perez. He is still committed to Florida, but we believe firmly that he will end up flipping his pledge and being an Ohio State Buckeye alongside his teammate Sincere Johnson at Glenville. Quarterback Luke Fahey from California, Mission Viejo. He has announced his decision date. That will be July 3rd. So we're talking next Thursday for him. July 12th, Derek Cooper, the 4-star running back from the Chaminade Madonna High School in Florida, Jeremiah Smith's high school. He'll decide between Ohio State, Georgia, Ohio State, Georgia, Miami, and Alabama on the 12th. I still think the Buckeyes are trailing there. Seems like Carlos Lockman is okay with just Favor Aki at running back. This weekend, however, is really about supplementing the defensive line and adding to Khary Wilder. That starts on Friday night with Damari Simeon, the 4-star defensive tackle from New Jersey, St. Augustine Prep. He is a 6'3", 280-pounder, a guy the Buckeyes believe can be a real force as a 3-tech. Also has the frame to maybe get to the 1-tech type of body style. Either way, really electric first step. Seems like Ohio State, Penn State with Texas on the periphery. I'm not here to make projections or predictions, but I do think Ohio State is in a good position as I record this on Thursday afternoon to win that. Now, of course, we saw in the last week with the recruitment of Luke Wafel as he flipped to USC back and forth after giving Ohio State staff a very good reason to think that he was coming to Columbus. Same for cornerback Danny Odom, who ended up committing to Nebraska on Monday. The Buckeyes felt very confident that he was going to pick the Buckeyes on Monday afternoon. And then in the blink of an eye, things changed because we live in a world where things can change quickly based on monetary reasons. So we'll see how that plays out when it comes to Damari Simeon. Again, this is a player that, much like Kari Wilder, has not received a lot of fanfare. He's not a player that talks a lot. He's not very active on social media. He has visited all of those schools multiple times: Ohio State, Penn State, Texas, Michigan. The Wolverines round out his top 4, but they're not really involved here as a decision gets made on Friday. I think Ohio State's going to win it, but I'm not going to. Folks, the hard part is these days to just go out and definitively say this is absolutely going to happen is really risky because, as we saw with those players I just mentioned, anything can happen in the last minute. Jaquaden Guilford, I think, is a prime example of that. This is a 3-star wide receiver from Northrop High School in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He is a player that Brian Hartline offered last summer and really wants in the 2026 Ohio State recruiting class. All week long, it has felt pretty solid that this was going to go Ohio State's way. As I record this again on Thursday afternoon, there is some rumblings out there that Ole Miss has made a real aggressive play to try and keep him away from Hartline and Ohio State. We'll see if that plays out. Heading into Friday morning, I probably give the edge to Ole Miss, but I know Brian Hartline and his results speak for themselves. If he wants a player, generally he gets them. and he wants Jerquaden Guilford. So we'll see how that plays out. What's interesting is that I don't know that any other school in the country other than Ole Miss would have the ability to even make this close, because the Rebels are one of the few programs that have produced top tier wide receiver prospects in the last handful of years. Not on the clip that Ohio State has, certainly, or LSU, but Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin have done a really good job of developing wide receivers. There's a lot of them floating around the NFL, and they can sell that. Plus, they can tell him, hey, Jerquaden, you're the fifth wide receiver in the Ohio State recruiting class. And although he would be the fifth receiver to commit to Ohio State in this class, I'm going to tell you right now, the Buckeyes believe that Jerquaden Guilford's upside and his long-term potential is as good as anybody in this class. And that includes Chris Henry Jr., that includes Caden Dixon-Wyatt, or Brock Boyd, or Jaden Ricketts. So the addition of Jerquaden Guilford should not be viewed as gravy for Ohio State. This is a priority player that Brian Hartline wants. The Buckeyes canceled official visits from every other wide receiver that was not committed this summer, with the exception of Guilford. He visited last weekend. Coming out of that trip, things were very, very positive for Ohio State. But as we've seen in other instances, the closer we get to a decision, the more other schools get aggressive, and I don't want to say desperate, but they realize that maybe they have to pull out some additional stops. So we'll see what happens there. The third player to announce this weekend will be Cameron Brickell, and I have listed on the graphic here June 27th. That is incorrect. I apologize. He will be committing on June 28th on Saturday. He is a 3-star defensive tackle at the IMG Academy in Florida, 6'3", 300 plus pounds. He is a big-bodied one tech. He can also play a 3 tech if asked. He's quick. He's versatile. He is raw. He is a player that is very strong at the point of attack, but needs to continue to refine his body. And what will be interesting here, because JJ Perez, as I mentioned, Jameer Perez is not flipped to Ohio State yet. There is, of course, the belief that will happen. But until it does, there's this weird numbers game floating around out there. And some of that has changed in the course of the last week. I mentioned, I believe it was last Friday's edition of The Beat on the Austin Birm Show, that Ohio State would have been content with 4 defensive linemen in total. That number over the course of the last 4 days has changed considerably. I've heard now that the Buckeyes are considering even taking 6 defensive linemen in this class. So there is a scenario, there is a world where they would be willing and able and wanting to say yes to Jameer Perez, Damari Simeon, and Cam Brickell. And so they could have all 3 of those defensive tackles by the end of the weekend. I'm not sure about Perez because he doesn't have a date set, but him ending up anywhere other than Ohio State would be a surprise. So if Damari Simeon and Cam Brickell both commit to the Ohio State Buckeyes this weekend, you can pencil in JJ Perez with them. And at that point, I think Ohio State fans should begin wrapping their minds around the fact that Emmanuel Ruffin, a 4-star defensive tackle from Bessemer, not Alabaster. What am I talking about? Bessemer, Alabama, who is committing next week. I believe he's committing on July 4th. Will be deciding between LSU and Ohio State. I don't think Ohio State would have room at that point. And that's the same scenario, I think, and to the chagrin of a lot of people who cover this team and like the Ohio State Buckeyes, I don't think the Buckeyes would have the ability to say yes to Deuce Gerald's at that point either. So there is a little bit of a back and forth here that the Buckeyes have to figure out over these next 24 hours, especially when it comes to Cam Brickell, because I think that he is a longer-term development prospect, whereas Damari Simeon, I think, is a guy that they believe can play much sooner. It's going to lead to some interesting conversations, and then the rest of the defensive line recruiting pretty much hinges on the decision of Carter Meadows, the 4-star defensive end from Washington, D.C., Gonzaga High School. That looks like it's turning into an Ohio State and Michigan battle. There is no decision date set for him yet, but if Ohio State was in a position where they could say yes and they could take Damari Simeon, Cam Brickell, Jameer Perez, Khary Wilder, and Carter Meadows, they would be thrilled with that. And I've actually heard this week, and it's not, I don't know how much paying attention we should do to it yet, but I have heard this week that they would also entertain the notion of adding Landon Barnes, the other 4-star defensive end from Duncanville High School, as a complement to Khary Wilder and Carter Meadows if Barnes wants in. He also is committing next week. I think it's the 3rd for him. That seems like SMU has been rising up the conversation there. And LSU is also in the mix because that's where he's from. Speaking of SMU, we'll just move along here to wrap up this episode of The Beat on the Austin Birm Show. SMU did receive a commitment from Drew Evers, 4-star offensive lineman from Flower Mound, Texas, on Thursday. He was one of the handful of top remaining targets on the offensive line for Tyler Bowen and the Buckeyes. He picked SMU. It is the home school. As we've talked about over the last few weeks here and on other platforms, there was a sense coming out of his official visit that it was going to be Ohio State or SMU. At Texas A&M and a few others were involved, but ultimately the decision to stay home was the right one for Drew Evers, a 6'4", 300-pound guard that Ohio State folks told me they felt had upside similar to Donovan Jackson. So it's not a player that you're going to lament losing too much because it makes sense why he stays home. But from a building the total offensive line perspective, I think Drew Evers is a guy that a lot of people had circled as a potential perfect fit for the Buckeyes. He's going elsewhere. What that means, especially with the addition of Aaron Thomas this week, is going to be kind of interesting to watch as it plays out, because I think, and I mentioned it on the Thursday morning episode of The Beat when we had Aaron Thomas on the show, as we did as I did a mini snap judgments of that. I thought maybe that it would remove the ability for Ohio State to get aggressive or stay aggressive with North Carolina offensive lineman JB Shabazz. After talking to some people on Thursday, I no longer believe that's the case. I don't think that the addition of Aaron Thomas rules out anybody else, because the Buckeyes would and want to take a 3rd offensive tackle in this class. That would mean Sam Greer, Aaron Thomas, and one more. Felix Ojo is obviously the one that people are going to talk about the most. He's the 5-star. He's the big ticket item that's still left. But whether that's JB Shabazz, whether that's a continued pursuit of Washington Courthouse, Miami Trace offensive lineman Adam Guthrie, who's committed to Clemson, I think the Buckeyes are going to keep swinging there and all the way through signing day and just see what happens. Deron Parks, a player we mentioned from Cardinal Mooney High School in Sarasota, Florida. There's a lot of moving parts here. Even Landry Breed, who is a offensive lineman from Menor High School in Northeast Ohio, he committed to North Carolina State on Wednesday, but the Buckeyes have been watching him closely, and he still remains probably, as far as the in-state offensive linemen go, the most likely to earn an offer once the season rolls around, if the Buckeyes are still looking. So there's a lot of moving parts. A lot of things are happening when it comes to Ohio State recruiting right now. With the addition of Aaron Thomas on Wednesday night, the Buckeyes have 17 commitments. And if we're looking now at what could happen over these next couple of weeks, when you have again, this weekend, Jaquaden Guilford, Damari Simeon, and Cam Brickell, I think that I really do believe Ohio State can win all 3 of those, despite the back and forth nature of things with Guilford and Ole Miss right now. That would bring you to 20 commitments. And then you still have the hope of adding JJ Perez. That's 21. Carter Meadows, that'd be 22. If you find room out there for Landon Barnes, that's 23. Then you have the addition of Luke Fahey. If he commits to Ohio State next Thursday, which is now that Indiana has taken a quarterback, they were the primary competition for the Mission Viejo, California 4-star. I think that now that opens the door for Ohio State to be the clear-cut favorite. That's 24 commitments. This class is filling up quick, and there's going to run out of room. So a lot of wondering, like, when is the movement going to happen? And now it's all happening at once. We're going to try our best to keep up with it. This weekend, as I said, maybe some major pieces of the puzzle falling into place for Ohio State. We will talk about that and more, and the results of that and more, on Monday's edition of The Beat when Austin is back from vacation. Until then, this has been The Beat on the Austin and Birm Show. Thank you to everyone for watching and listening, whether that's on 97.1, the Fans YouTube channel, 10 TV Plus streaming services, or the 10 TV website. We really do appreciate you being here. Please like and subscribe, and let your friends know where Austin and Birm are now. I'm Jeremy Birmingham for Kari Wilder, who joined me earlier. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.